This video is sponsored by Squarespace. It has been almost 22 years since we first met the Gorosei, and at least as of the time I'm recording this video, we are on the precipice of seeing all 5 of them appear to take on Luffy and stop Vegapunk's message. If you needed a sign that we're in the endgame, this is it, because I mean, if you told me at the end of Wano that within just 52 chapters we'd see Luffy throwing a Gorosei member and Kizaru around like pizza dough, I would have thought you were insane. But Oda's just really pushing the tempo now, and this face-off to protect Vegapunk's message is almost like a microcosm of the Void Century, because the entire reason that the poneglyphs were made was to carry this information forward. And now Luffy, or Joy Boy you could say, is back and holding off the Gorosei so that some of that information can be finally shared with the world. This is pretty much what the Ancient Kingdom was hoping for all along. It is impossible to overstate how huge this is. And this fight is probably going to be almost like deja vu for the Gorosei if they truly are 800 years old. But something that I want to hone in on in this video is what the hell is going on with their powers, and what this could potentially all mean for Imu, because we've seen some abilities from Saturn which are just pretty unique, like long-range telepathic communication, using pentagram circles and black lightning to summon these forms over far distances, something akin to gravity that keeps people even as strong as Sanji or Frankie in place, and maybe the craziest thing of all is that he's able to just straight up regenerate, even to the point that Luffy said his punches aren't damaging him. Now, maybe the Ushi Oni form itself could maybe be explained by a mythical zone, but some of these other abilities seem almost like a new power system altogether, which I doubt it is, because Oda usually finds a way to ground it back into things we've already had established, but it does seem pretty fishy right now for sure. I actually did a poll on this to see how you guys felt about it, and I was pretty surprised to see that about 70% of you thought that this was the result of something other than a devil fruit, which is a good thing to me though, because I probably agree. And I think the best place to start this discussion has to be with these summoning circles, since we can now confirm that every Gorosei is summoned using those things, because this is obviously a connection back to Brook's time skip on Haratania, which is on Namakura Island. Here we found Satan worshippers who were trying to literally summon a demon from the underworld using a very similar circle. And you know, with typical Oda irony, he sent Brook there, who is the one man we know of who's actually visited the underworld before. And I think that's a big reason why Oda kept Brook separate from the Gorosei for so long during this arc. He was left on the ship pretty much the entire time. He would have definitely known what those circles were, and maybe would even recognize those forms somehow. And while the circle in Namakura only half worked, since it was actually Kuma who sent Brook there, clearly the Gorosei have figured out this system for real. Now, does that mean the Gorosei are actually from the underworld? Well, maybe. I know it sounds kind of wacky at first, but as I mentioned at the beginning, Oda always has a way of grounding things back into what has already been established. So we have to keep in mind that the underworld is an established physical place, and that it is feasible to return from, even if our one example was a specific devil fruit. And we even know that it's cold there because of Brook's ice powers. Not to mention the fact that, you know, devil fruits have devil straight in the name, and it was at least rumored that devils reside within the fruit. For zones, it was even said that they had a will of their own, and it came from the Gorosei, who would probably know. So if Saturn was truly like a devil from the underworld, he'd kind of only be like 1 or 2 degrees removed from having a devil fruit power anyway, because instead of like eating an Ushioni devil fruit and transforming his human body into it, he might just be summoning the real thing, which would have normally been inside of the fruit. Now, how real it truly is up to you. Like Atlas said at the very start of the arc, what is real and not is a debate as old as time, but I consider the matter settled. And this has kind of stuck with me ever since we first heard it almost 50 chapters ago. This comment was originally referring to the holograms, one of which was a giant space monster that Luffy couldn't even touch. And now Luffy's fighting a giant monster with the name of a planet, at least, that he can't even damage. So there's definitely a connection there. Not that Saturn is a hologram. I mean, we already know that people can touch him and even do like temporary damage, I guess, but still. And the only way to hurt the holograms was by using the photonic gloves. So I'm sure that there's going to be a trick to hurting the Gorosei as well. Since the gloves were like advanced technology, I could definitely see the ancient robot being our answer as to how we can hurt the Gorosei permanently, because there definitely is a way. I mean, Saturn has a scar, for crying out loud. And the space monster hologram I just mentioned even ended up fighting a robot hologram, so there you go. And the first time we ever even met Vegapunk, he was studying the power source of that ancient robot, which, given that it powered up when Luffy activated the drums of liberation, this is definitely going somewhere. Maybe this is just all tied to how we hurt the Gorosei. But while his regeneration ability is unlike pretty much anything we've ever seen before, the powers that we saw in his second transformation are actually quite familiar, and uncoincidentally, it all ties to Impel Down, yet another parallel for Hell because of Dante's Inferno, because there are aspects of that form that remind me of both the Jailer Beast as well as Magellan, two of the strongest defenses in the entire prison. And I want to call this thing like an awakened form, but he already seemed awakened before, especially with the God ribbon that Lucci and Kaku also had. So I don't know what this thing is. To me, this form almost felt like him going into his truest form, like he was almost holding back before, which is sort of what Sanji alluded to by saying that his eyes show he's lost any pretense of being human. And like I said, this feels like a definite connection to the Jailer Beasts, who were said to have awakened their fruits, but it doesn't seem if they could control it like Kaku or Lucci did. This is kind of what Shaka was alluding to earlier in the arc, and I think one of the connections to them has to be their eyes. Now they do look a little bit different to Saturn's, to be fair, but there's at least that blank or mindless stare aspect to it. And you know, there were 5 Jailer Beasts, just like we have 5 Gorosei, and even how Blackbeard got 5 level 6 prisoners to join his crew, so there's a connection there for sure. I mean, Crocodile even told us that these Jailer Beasts' resilience was their strong point, and that they just keep reviving and fighting over and over. This kind of reminds me of Saturn, who, no matter how much damage he takes, he gets back up and regenerates, even though that ability is on a different level to the Jailer Beasts. But while those things seem to have lost control or kind of become mindless in that form, Saturn was still able to telepathically communicate even while in that form. He didn't like lose his sanity kind of like the Jailer Beast did. He just got stronger. And for the record, I do think that this telepathy is just the voice of all things, because it reminds me so much of Momonosuke and Zunisha. It's kind of like they have their own private Denden Mushi line or something. So I don't think that is going to be something like exclusive to the Gorosei, but rather I just think that they've mastered it. And then the other ability that we saw was the Venom, which is definitely a parallel to Magellan's powers. And he even became a Venom demon towards the end of the arc to try to stop everyone from escaping. Crocodile even called him the boss of Hell, and I think you could even argue that the multiple limbs Saturn was noodling around were like Magellan's Hydra. So whether Saturn has a devil fruit or not, it's sort of impossible to ignore the underworld connections here. Even Sabo said who knew Hell would be located at the top of the world, right when he saw the Gorosei use their forms. And like I said before, devil fruits already tie to Hell because devil is right in the name. It would just make so much sense that if anyone in One Piece was going to understand the fundamentals of how the underworld works and take advantage of it, it would be the top brass of the world government. That might be how they beat the ancient kingdom in the first place. But just like how Vegapunk is trying to tell the world about the Void Century right now, I need to take some time to tell you the truth about the sponsor for today's video, Squarespace. Because if you too have a message for the world, what better way to do that than with your own website? And the best part about using Squarespace isn't just how good the websites look, but how easy they make the entire creation process, which really all starts with their Fluid engine. This is where you start with a template, customize all the different details, and then just reorganize things how you want by dragging and dropping. You can even set up an online store or exclusive members areas for your VIPs. What you're looking at right now is my own Squarespace site, and I'm not kidding you, this all took me about 3 total hours to put together. And if you head to squarespace.com right now, you can even get a free trial, and when you're ready to launch your site, just make sure to go to squarespace.com/daksake for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring, but let's get back to the video. So let's go take another look at what happened during Brook's time skip, because now that the circles are obviously more important than ever, we should maybe consider everything else that's going on in this scene. Like, for example, the entire reason those cultists were trying to summon a demon anyway was to help in their war versus the Long Arm tribe. And you know, the Long Arms and Long Legs have been at war for like 1,000 years, which could definitely be a parallel to this at least 900-year-long dispute between the ancient kingdom and world government. In addition to that, they were offering tributes. They even asked Brook if he needed a sacrifice, and that every single one of them were willing to offer their soul, truly making Brook like the Soul King. But this idea of sacrifice or exchange is definitely something we have seen before in One Piece. For example, when you eat a devil fruit, you automatically give up your ability to swim. The ocean weakens you. I know Vegapunk's theory is that these powers drew the ire of Mother Nature, but regardless, there is still a tribute here of some kind in order to use those powers. And we also kind of saw a tribute during the Nolan flashback, where Kalgara's daughter was being offered up to their god in order to save their village. This altar is even where we first heard of the 4 gods, being the Sun God, Earth God, Rain God, and and forest god. And you know, Skypiea is also where we first saw Luffy in the Nika pose. But where it starts getting really crazy to me is that we also had this scene where the Mary is on the sacrificial altar as well. And this is also where we first saw the Mary's Klabautermon, which a Klabautermon is a pretty magical entity in One Piece. I mean, if something like that can exist, then I mean Saturn or Emu being a legitimate devil isn't out of the realm of possibility. So just the simple fact that the sacrificial altar was tied to it in any way is pretty crazy. But this is where it gets super crazy, because the main dude from Brook's time skip was wearing a hat with the head of a sheep, just like the Marys. And there was even another sheep down here towards the bottom of the panel, which shows Oda is really digging into this like sacrificial lamb idea. So I think what may have happened here is that just like how the demon worshippers were seeking help in their battle against the Long Arms, maybe these 5 bozos, Saint Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venustro, and Mercury, wanted to tap into this sort of underworldly magic in order to help beat the ancient kingdom, or maybe even just to usurp power from the world government once that war was done. And maybe that's where Emu comes in, because we have to remember one important thing. Nerona Emu was once one of the original 20 kings, likely on par with Lily or the past Don Quixote leader or any of the other 17. And they were probably a regular human as well, because the celestial dragons looked down on all the other races, as we recently saw with the Fishmen and Mjosgard. But something had to happen at some point that let Emu take the empty throne and be accepted as the top dog. And the same goes for the Gorosei, who were kind of the public-facing side of that. When I think about what Emu was like 800 years ago when they were still like a normal king, they kind of remind me of Stelly, because during the Reverie, Stelly wanted nothing more than to sit on the empty throne, even kind of ignoring the oath that he was supposed to take to not sit on it. And that idea goes even deeper when you consider the fact that he was adopted in Sabo's place, and Sabo was the one to break in and see Emu on the throne. So if that parallel is true, I could see Emu kind of being desperate for power, sort of like Stelly is, which then led Emu to the dark arts, if you will. Perhaps this was because Emu just wanted the throne, or maybe it was looking like they were gonna lose to the ancient kingdom, so Emu got desperate. Whichever one it is, this could just be where the Gorosei maybe stepped in, because maybe they already knew how this magic worked, and they were the ones to introduce Emu to it. But it probably came at a cost, where Emu had to sacrifice something, or maybe Emu was just possessed now by that very same demon, kind of being done in by their own hubris. I mean, even when we saw Emu speak to Cobra, Emu did so in the third person, referring to themselves as Mu, which means dream or void. So I could definitely see a world where like the Emu of 800 years ago is like trapped or being controlled in that body, and maybe eventually Luffy makes it his goal to free them. And this idea that the Gorosei kind of worked with Emu to teach them the dark arts or whatever kind of reminds me of 2 different important situations, Doflamingo and Orochi, 2 people who were guided from a very young age to take the throne they viewed as rightfully theirs. And Doflamingo is even an ex-celestial dragon and one of the national treasure of Marijois, so there's a lot of good connections there for sure. So for Doflamingo, one of the best parallels is just this pair of images. I mean, you guys can already probably see what I'm cooking, and you've probably already seen it before, to be honest. Doflamingo was sort of coached up from a young age and then obviously ended up getting pretty far through some sinister means. So I could totally see a world where like the Gorosei recognized Emu's potential when Emu was one of the kings, and maybe helped bring back whatever demon is controlling Emu today. And then the Orochi connection is maybe even more interesting, because even in this initial scene at Hara Hitania, we kind of see this shack that's broken down and in the rain, which reminds me so much of this scene where Higurashi met Orochi, and that's where Higurashi gave Orochi that mythical zone fruit, and that led to the eventual takeover of Wano and all that jazz, so it's definitely important. And it's just yet another situation where like a young person was influenced by older people to pursue a certain goal. But what I find so interesting about the Wano situation is that that power structure was sort of split in 2, where Orochi was the public-facing leader to the Wano people, but Kaido was the strength that kind of made it all possible. I think Emu could be the very same way, except just in one person, where it looks like Nerona Emu, but the powers are really from an entirely different being. And there would definitely be advantages in doing that. I mean, the reason the Gorosei probably wanted Emu specifically, or at least one of the 20 kings for this purpose, was because then after being possessed, it would still look like one of the 20 kings. It's probably going to be a lot easier to convince the rest of the kings to make you the leader if you were at least one of the original 20. And maybe this is why they want Vivi right now. Perhaps Emu needs to do some kind of a reset by swapping into Vivi's body, because Vivi is a fairly popular person, and as Brook said after Wano, he had never heard of anyone speak negatively of the leaders of Alabasta. So if Emu were to be like ratted out by Vegapunk's message or something, or even Sabo or otherwise, swapping into Vivi's body and then casting out the original one that everyone is becoming familiar with would be a way to sort of sidestep all the trouble. Because I mean, most of us tend to remember how people look and sound more than anything else, right? Only people who can sense their will or like their true voice or whatever would know that it isn't really Vivi, or in the case of 800 years ago, Emu. So I can definitely see a scenario where in the future, Luffy's gonna find out that Emu is possessed by something else, or that Vivi is potentially, and that he needs to save them. Like, remember how Luffy crashed in while Boa was taking a bath and found out that she had that scar on her back, so then he kind of built up some empathy for her and her sisters, even when she seemed like such a terrible person, which she is for kicking a puppy? I can definitely see something like that happening for Luffy. Like, imagine he crashes into the flower room with Emu, and for one reason or another, finds out that Emu is actually suffering. Like, maybe the demonic side to Emu leaves for some reason, maybe because it too gets summoned to Egghead or something like the Gorosei did, and so maybe the human side to Emu would just be left behind, and that's who Luffy meets. I mean, it would be so ironic to me if the entire world learns about Emu and begins hating them, but Luffy is the only one out there like, no, you guys don't understand. They aren't all bad, they're just being controlled by some demon thing, you gotta trust me, etc, etc. Like, the whole world would just want to kill Emu, but Luffy, the sun god, would be demanding that they do it a certain way. Probably because it wouldn't be fair to the person being possessed if they just killed him outright. Because again, you gotta think about how devil fruits really work. You usually eat the fruit and then supposedly get granted the powers of that devil. For Emu to be the opposite, like using a human body as a host for that demon to exist, it would just make so much sense. Like, isn't it weird that we also haven't seen Saturn's human body since he summoned his form? Even if you go back to the chapter before he summoned it, it looked like he fell asleep at the very end. Do these guys need to like fall asleep or just pass out or something in order for their demon forms to appear? It could almost be like they're dreaming them into existence, which that would kind of make some sense, you know? Usually a devil fruit power and a human sort of merge into one thing so that they exist in the one body. So if Saturn gets to have them separated, thus giving him regeneration and all this stuff, it would at least make sense that he's only able to use one of the human body or the demon at a time, thus maybe making his human body like a sitting duck, and that's how he actually hurt them potentially. I mean, by having the demon separated from a human body, I guess it just wouldn't be bound to the same rules of physics or whatever, because it's not like 100% real. Which, if we again go look at Brook's journey back from the underworld, we have to keep in mind that, you know, his soul and body were separated. They were two different things. And that's the reason that his body even decomposed into a skeleton in the first place. He wasn't able to find his body before that happened because his soul was just kind of floating around in this cloud form looking for it. And it's not like he could even operate that body without his soul finding it and going into it. So the Gorosei may also be separating the two since, you know, Brook was separated after leaving the underworld, so maybe the same thing is happening to the Gorosei since they may be bringing these forms from there. Brook even told us in Fishman Island that though my spirit has parted from my body and now belongs in the afterlife, it remains here in this world, allowing me to live on by producing a unique and powerful energy that is almost physical in form. Through my music, I can touch the souls of others with this energy, drawing them into my world and even bewitching their senses. I bet that that energy Brook is referring to here is tied to the same energy that the Gorosei are using to make these forms. That energy is what likely lets these demon forms exist on our plane. And this could also maybe explain the shadow from chapter 1075, which is still unexplained. As I've said several times by now, it looks a lot like Saturn's silhouette to me, and this happened a full day before Saturn ever arrived. And it was like 2 chapters after we learned his name and that he was even coming to Egghead. I wonder if these dudes can all like astral project or just shadow project over long distances, which we did just see the summoning circles bring the Gorosei all the way from Marijois, so it does kind of fit. So to sum this all up, I think the Gorosei were the ones to introduce this taboo dark summoning magic and stuff to Nerona Emu, which then led to Emu being possessed and then ascending to the empty throne. And I'm almost positive that this would have involved a sacrifice of some kind, if not many, and maybe that's what the Void Century was all about. And in return, the Gorosei were probably also given access to these forms using other summoning circles. I would imagine that these forms the Gorosei have are probably like underlings to whatever demon Emu truly was. And I know that a lot of people have been floating the idea around lately that like Emu maybe created the Gorosei, or maybe the Gorosei are Emu's satellites, which is something I think I've been hearing since the start of Egghead pretty much. And my guess is that it's going to be a little bit of both at this point, where the human Gorosei maybe recruited the human Emu, but then maybe the demon side to Emu that took over then created or recruited the demon sides of the Gorosei. So maybe there's a little give and take there. It's a little bit of both. It could be kind of like how Black Blackbeard got basically the 5 most dangerous prisoners from level 6, the equivalent to the deepest depths of hell. Emu probably let the Gorosei access the 5 most dangerous devil powers that hell had to offer in a very similar way. And if that idea interests you, then definitely hit like and subscribe, because I am still cooking a full video on those Emu and Blackbeard parallels specifically. But that is going to be it for today, and if you like this video, then you may like one of these two that YouTube swore to me you'd like to watch after this. But until next time, later.